Despite the weather, it was really nice to be able to come and talk at somewhere close enough to London to get there in the morning, although Rosemary, who's organising this, did ring me in a worried way as I was walking from the station to say, I'm sure you're on the way, but it's getting a bit close. The first time I spoke at one of these events, I had to stay away overnight, and I'm always reluctant to do that because I've got a young son myself, and having been away overnight, I picked him up on the way home from his nursery. And of course, as you know, needy parent, I wanted to be reassured that he'd miss me as much as I'd missed him. And I said, Sam, I was away last night and I really missed you. And he said, yes. And he had that empathetic look that children have. He said, yes, I missed Mummy when she was away. So that put me in my place. I just wanted to say something about what you can expect. By the way, can you put your hand up? Can you hear me at the back? But I need to. Great. What you can expect from a Department for Education civil servant talking about issues like this. If you are sad enough to have looked at my biographical details in the handout, you'll know that I've not myself got a long experience of working in the early years sector. Like a lot of civil servants, I've covered a number of policy areas in my career. I've been doing this job, working on early years, particularly focused on the EYFS for the last 15 months. So what I am not is an expert on small children, their learning and development. Everybody in this room will know more about that than I do. I'm sure that's true. I'm also sure that everyone here has a really strong grasp of the benefits of preschool education, early years, for young children. Not everybody does, and I think it's worth just dwelling on that a bit. Slightly provocatively, I wanted to use a Daily Mail headline. I don't know if everybody can see that, but I'll tell you what it says anyway. Last December, when we published the government response to the consultation on draft EYFS, Daily Mail, among other people, picked up on that publication and picked up particularly on the fact that in the early learning goals, there'd been a slight change from the consultation draft, and instead of saying counting 1 to 10 for children by the end of reception, it said counting 1 to 20. So there's the headline, numeracy goals toughened. Now, I don't want to dwell on that, although you might want to ask about it. What really interested me was the comments that readers of that put after the story. When you read these online stories, people get the chance to comment, and they really are fascinating. Somebody called Leanna said, my 3-year-old can count to 109 without help, add and subtract, and recognise number groups, and I would be disappointed if my child was struggling with 1 to 20. I think they need to set their standards a little higher. Another person commented, my 3-year-old can count to 50 in English, 20 in Spanish, and 10 in Swedish. Quite a mixture. She can also write her own name. She can do simple maths problems and is completely fluent in both Spanish and English. On the other hand, somebody who signed themselves Peter Pan, maybe not their real name, thought children shouldn't go beyond 10 until they're 7 years old. They need a complete understanding about the first 10 digits to gain confidence. The Japanese and the Chinese do that, and they have almost 100% literacy and are nearly 100% literate in maths. We teach the wrong way. And someone else said, shouldn't even be at school in that age. They should be at home playing and accumulating a wealth of experience. Now, I've quoted those comments, and there were many more, not to make fun of those people, because those views are sincerely held, but to illustrate something that I think is really quite striking. There's a very wide divergence of views among the British public, and no doubt beyond, about what is best for children in the early years. Hand in hand with that, there's also a lack of understanding, I think, a lack of common understanding among parents about what they should expect in terms of their children's development at different ages. And hand in hand with that as well, also really important, I think there's a lack of understanding and a lack of recognition among the population at large about how important early education can be and how far things have progressed in recent years. Now, this government and the last government, there's a common thread to their policies, I think, have given a high priority to investing in early education and childcare. I'm not going to dwell on all the details of these things, but there's a wealth of material around that sets out the government's approach to this, from the foundation years policy documents that were published last summer through to the recent EYFS document which was published last month and which I hope people will have seen, and more recent things like Cathy Nutt-Brown's interim report on qualifications and the early years workforce. Now, the government's approach is set out in those documents, and the commitment to early years in what we know are very tough economic times is illustrated by a number of ways. But just to take one example, the extension of free early education for 3 and 4 year olds, and extending that by 2014 to 260,000 2-year-olds. Those things have the potential to make a really big difference to large numbers of people. That's a significant investment in testing times. Now, why, in very, very difficult economic circumstances, when we know that all sorts of things are coming under financial pressure, why has the government chosen to continue to give a priority to the early years? Well, I think you'll be familiar with the reasons for that. I'm not going to dwell, given the time, on the details of this, but what this chart shows, and the next one, is some of the familiar evidence about the impact of a high-quality preschool experience on children in later life. So that chart, for those who can't see it all the way back there, shows the impact on children's attainment in English and maths at age 11 of having had some kind of preschool experience. And the right-hand column, the biggest one, shows that a high-quality preschool experience has a very lasting and significant impact. The much more difficult to read chart comes from older evidence from the United States, the High Scopes Perry preschool study, with disadvantaged children, a small sample in a disadvantaged Michigan community, but that followed this cohort through. They're in their 50s now. Not only did those children who had a very high quality preschool experience do better in school in terms of attainment and doing their homework and things like that, but it carried on in terms of earnings in later life and being less likely to fall foul of the criminal justice system. So that evidence and others like it tells us what I'm sure is familiar to you in this room, that children develop fast in the early years. They develop better if they have a high quality preschool experience, and also, crucially, good support from parents at home. And children who develop well by the end of their early years phase generally continue to do well. We know though, don't we, that not every child does well at this age, and we know that in this country we have particular issues about children's development and child poverty. The UK is ranked as middling by the OECD in terms of places to grow up. 19th out of 24 developed countries for material inequality, and 13th out of 24 for educational inequality. And nearly 4 million children in this country live in low-income households. Where I live, in inner London, not untypical, more than a quarter of children live in workless households, or they did when we last got the figures, and it's quite possible that it's more than that now. The UK has a higher proportion of children living in workless households than any other European Union country. Now that's why in a whole series of recent reviews by Frank Field, who looked at child poverty, Graham Allen, who looked at early intervention, and of course Claire Tickell, who looked at the early years foundation stage, they all said similar things. They all supported the case for early intervention and for investment in high quality in the early years, because that pays off. And I can assure you that ministers really do get that. It may be, as I said earlier, that not everybody recognises that, but ministers in our department do get that, and they are clear the purpose of investing in childcare and early education is children's development. It may help other things, like helping people go to work, but the most important point is child development. So making early education more freely available is really important, but we know that that's not enough in itself. It has to be really good. And we need to continue to progress in improving quality across the sector. And that brings me on to the topic for this morning, which is the early years foundation stage. Now, as you know, the purpose of the EYFS is to set the standards, set out the requirements for the whole setting. It's really quite unusual, if you think about it, to have a framework that applies to state-funded, to independent, to voluntary, to private settings, a universal statement of requirements. It describes what a good nursery, a good preschool, a good childminder should do, and what's required and what Ofsted will inspect them against. It sets out the levels of development that we should expect of children at certain ages. Now, as you know, Claire Tickell, the Chief Executive of Action for Children, reviewed the EYFS a year or so ago, and she said three things really. It's having a positive impact, it's supporting greater professionalism, and it's helping to raise standards, and I think Ofsted evidence bears that out. So, second thing she said is we should keep it. We need to keep that momentum going. But she said in its current form, which until the end of August still applies, there's too much time spent filling in forms, not enough time interacting with children. Now, the government accepted Claire Tickell's advice pretty much in full, and as I'm sure you're aware, published for consultation a draft revised EYFS last year, and the final version of that was published at the end of March, and I hope people have seen that. Whoops, go back to that one. Key elements are put up there, and I think this will be familiar stuff, so I'm not necessarily going to dwell on this too much. Keeping a universal framework, simplifying it, making it more accessible, reducing the bureaucracy associated with it, and leaving more to professional judgment. And that's a really important point. That's a challenge and an opportunity, and I'll come back to that a bit later. Putting a greater focus on the areas that are most crucial for children's development through the prime areas, communication, physical development, and so on. Crucial for children's development and their readiness for school and for later life. Simplifying again, reducing the early learning goals from 16 to 17, and simplifying assessment at age 5 through the EYFS profile. And really importantly, and this is an important point for people like Frank Field and Graham Allen with their focus on early intervention, supporting earlier intervention, so those children who are in a setting of some sort when they're 2, having a progress check, a report to parents on their development. So far, the new EYFS seems to be quite well received, and I want to focus this morning on a couple of points where I still sense that people need some more information or more reassurance. Picked up from the consultation and the reaction so far. The first point is this issue of simplification. The government decided to keep a universal framework, and as I've suggested, that's quite an unusual decision for a government which, if you look at other areas, is heavily committed to reducing regulation, to reducing requirements. So there was an option to do away with the EYFS, and some people may have welcomed that, but the government decided to keep it, and they did that for good reasons, because Claire Tickell, as I've said this is working, it needs to be given time to bed in, we need to keep the momentum up. There are a lot of strengths here. So it's crucial to keep that common framework of quality and standards. But she said there's too much of it. It's too unwieldy, you need to make it simpler, you need to make it clearer, and you need to free up practitioners to do what is the most important thing for them to do, which is to work with children. So we need to be clear that the EYFS document, which we published at the end of March, has a really specific purpose, because some people have said, well, there's things that used to be there that aren't there, or there's things I'm used to, maybe you've cut too much out. It's a statement of requirements. It's what providers must do. It's what Ofsted will inspect against. Our ambition, and you can tell me whether we've succeeded or not, was to make that as simple and straightforward as we possibly could, and to be clear about what is required to be done, and leave far more to professional judgment how you best do it, to try not to prescribe so much the how, but to be clear about the what. Now, many people are telling us that they do think it's simpler, they do think it's clearer, and people have commented positively on the Foundation Years website, for example. One I can quote: "It's half the size of the previous EYFS and the statements are much easier to understand." Slightly selective quoting maybe. "I'm over the moon about the change." It's always nice to hear that sort of thing. But some people told us, when they saw the draft last year, some people said, well, okay, I can see you want to simplify, but actually there's some things where we need a bit more information and we need a bit more guidance. We need more support. We accepted that argument. We accepted the need for some additional material. But it's really important that we try to avoid the misconceptions that I think have arisen in the past, where people have looked at guidance and interpreted that as being a requirement. Guidance is guidance. Guidance is additional information. It's there to help. It's not a requirement. So the supporting materials, which again I hope people have had a chance to see, either already published or forthcoming, include a revised version of Development Matters, so practice guidance produced by Early Education, and that's available on the website, the Foundation Years website, the address of which I gave earlier, so you'll have access to this presentation. Case studies and advice on completing the progress check at age 2, produced by the National Children's Bureau. Again, that was published at the end of March. We're also planning to produce a summary for parents of the early years foundation stage, again making clear to parents what they can expect and what they should be able to see, due to be published by the summer. And later, the Standards and Testing Agency will be producing guidance and exemplification for reception teachers on completing the new Age 5 assessment, which needs to happen in the summer of 2013. The key principle, as I've said, is to try to avoid that guidance taking on the status of additional requirements. We need to keep that really clearly in mind. Another issue that it's worth just highlighting for the moment, it came up at an event I spoke at on Tuesday, was this business of school readiness. When we consulted on the draft early years foundation stage last summer, it was really clear that quite a few people felt anxious about the language that was being used and the way some important issues were being developed in the document. Now, I hope that the final version that came out in March has addressed a lot of those points, and we certainly worked really hard with people from the sector to get the language right. But I know that some people still have a worry about the emphasis on school readiness. Some people assume that if the government puts that in a document, they mean something quite narrow by it. In fact, it should be understood in a broad sense. And although the EYFS document in March doesn't say much in detail, if you want to know what the government thinks it means by school readiness, the response to consultation that we published in December said quite a lot about this, and I just want to read a bit from that, and hopefully that will help. It said, "School readiness refers to children having the broad range of essential knowledge and skills that provide the right foundation for good future progress through school and life. In their first years, through exploration and play, children learn to walk and run, to talk and understand, and learn to relate to others, as well as beginning to read and write and use numbers. These are all important elements of school readiness. They're reflected in the early learning goals. And the EYFS framework accordingly recognises the central importance of play in children's learning." I said the new EYFS was being well received, and I hope you will welcome it, but I'll find out shortly whether you do or you don't. But someone once said, if you can find a path with no obstacles on it, it probably doesn't lead anywhere. And opportunities and steps forward often go hand in hand with further challenges, don't they? Now, I hope that people will welcome the emphasis on leaving more to professional judgment. I hope people will welcome that, and I hope people will take that and run with it. But it's also a challenge, isn't it? It's also potentially more uncomfortable for people. Expanding free early education is also extremely important and a very welcome development, but similarly that's a challenge too, and we know that the challenge of providing the capacity for the 2-year-old entitlement and indeed having the right people to do it, that's going to be a challenge over the next few years. It's crucial to invest in quality, but that challenge is a good opportunity too, because I think the stimulus of additional free education gives us an opportunity to get more better qualified people working with young children. And that brings me on to one area, last area I just want to highlight, which is workforce and qualifications. Because no matter what we say in the early years foundation stage, you know, ministers and civil servants can write what they like. Ultimately, early education and childcare will only ever be as good as the people who work with the children. That's absolutely fundamental. And it's clear that the qualifications and capacity and ability of people who work in early years settings probably makes the biggest difference to the impact on those children and the kind of impact I was talking about just now that carries on into later life. Now, as you probably know, Professor Cathy Nutt-Brown from the University of Sheffield is currently reviewing this area, and she'll publish her final report in the summer. Here again, there is an opportunity and a challenge. Because the early years sector, we know, has the image of being low paid, low status, low qualified, and there is, let's be honest, some truth in that. But I think the thing that Cathy is keen to highlight is how much progress has been made in recent years, how much progress continues to be made, and I think she is very keen to propose some important steps forward on the quality of qualifications, the quality of people's preparation, career development and progression in the sector. So we look forward to that. In her interim report, just one other point to make about that, she highlighted a couple of issues. One, as I've said, was the content and quality of qualifications, and importantly the preparation that learners get in making them. And she also talked about the low level of expectation that there was in terms of literacy and numeracy for people doing those qualifications. So we're keen to see what she's got to say and keen to progress. There'll be another challenge there and another opportunity. But it is really important, I think, to keep making progress in driving up quality. I'll just fairly quickly to focus on what are the next steps? What can you expect to see happening in this sector? Obviously, from September this year, the new framework coming into place. Soon, we hope, the government response to consultation on the 2-year-old entitlement and a phased approach to implementing that. So that should be published very soon. One thing I haven't mentioned, but I can talk about in questions if people want, is the teaching agency, which has just started operating this month, which includes in its remit the early years workforce, and that's another opportunity. And ministers have also signalled that they see the EYFS as an important step forward in terms of reducing burdens and simplifying things, but they are prepared to consider further steps to reduce bureaucracy if people highlight things that get in the way. So the 3 challenges I've highlighted there: getting ready for the new EYFS, really big challenge on expanding the free entitlement, and then, subject to what Cathy Nutt-Brown tells us needs to happen, responding to her review. One thing that motivates me, and I talked about the variety of things that, as a civil servant, you can work on, ranging from higher education, which is one of my past sins, employment policy, and so on. One of the things that motivated me to come and work in this area a year or so ago was that sense that in some areas of policy, some areas of delivery, if you get it right and if things go well, there is a sense that you can really make a difference. It seems self-evident to me that the early years is one of those. If we get this right, if we continue the progress that's being made, it will make a difference. Now that picture there, is anybody from London? All right, 1 or 2. This is a now derelict building near where I live. It's the Ladywell Play Tower. Used to be a swimming pool before that. Why have I put that picture up there? Well, when I did my first speaking engagement in this policy area, it just by chance was in Bristol. And my daughter had just graduated from university there. And going to Bristol, talking about early years and thinking about higher education, made me think about what a remarkable change I had seen in her short lifetime. When my daughter was 2-3 years old, what we had in our area of London was some voluntary playgroups for a few hours a week, and this place where it was called the Play Tower. You could take your children along there, and it was just basically a big space with toys, barely supervised, and stressed parents could have a cup of tea, read the paper, and if I'm really, really honest, not engage much with their children, which is disgraceful, I know, and have a rest. Now, that kind of scenario in terms of what's available for young children is a long way from what we see now with a network of children's centres, with free nursery entitlement, with a universal framework of standards and quality. A long way. So it feels to me like there's been quite a big change just in the years from my daughter being 2 or 3 to her early 20s, which she is now. And that's because of the priority that successive governments have given to investing in this area, because early years policy is a place where we can prove that making the effort, making the investment, getting it right, improving the quality makes a very positive difference. So going back to where I started this morning, not everybody yet recognises that. Not everybody yet recognises the importance of the work that goes on with young children. It's not just wiping their noses and changing nappies. It's far more important than that. Not everybody yet recognises the importance of the work that you and your colleagues are doing and why it's worth investing in. Partly it's common sense. I just wanted to end with an uplifting thought. Frederick Douglass, US civil rights campaigner, once said, "It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men," and at its heart, that's the point of this policy. I don't think we underestimate the difficulty of building strong children, but none of us wants to repair the broken men, so that's where we focus. Thank you very much for your time.